Okay, so we're going to go way back to the dawn of time, to 2008, when Dennis Prager, who now runs Prager University, which is basically just a YouTube channel spouting conspiracy theories and conservative rhetoric, wrote an article on a happy marriage, I guess you could say, only it's not the usual kind of tips and advice that you'd usually see. It was called When a Woman Isn't in the Mood, and it's in two parts. What I think I will do is I will read through it, and then I will interject my opinion as we go. Now you may say this was 2008, maybe he's changed his mind, but he still sounds pretty much the same as he did then, and also he hasn't come out saying that he disagrees with what he said, and this is still on his little website. So before we begin, I'm gonna guess that this is not going to take into account the idea of perhaps non-binary or trans or anything which someone might be going through and felt pressured into a cis normative marriage. So the wife per se, like that's not going to be taken into consideration. You know, according to Dennis Prager, you look like a woman, that's it, you know. So it's not gonna take anything like that into account. It does take some very strange things into account, though. I had a quick look, but we'll get to that. Given our preoccupation with politics and economics, it is easy to forget that for most of us, micro issues still play a greater role in our lives. So here are some thoughts that, as heretical as they might sound, have been found extremely helpful, sometimes even marriage-saving, from listeners to my radio show, which features a male-female hour every week, which I'm guessing is probably heavily biased. The subject is one of the most common problems that besets marriages: the wife who is not in the mood, and the consequently frustrated and hurt husband. Oh. There are marriages with the opposite problem: a wife who is frustrated and hurt because her husband is rarely in the mood. But as important and as destructive as that problem is, it has different causes and different solutions, and is therefore not addressed here. So basically, the woman in the relationship, her concerns are just not addressed anywhere. No matter what side of the issue she falls on, it doesn't matter how she feels. We're just going to brush over that. What is addressed is the far more common problem of he wants, she doesn't want. It is an axiom of contemporary marital life that if a wife is not in the mood, she need not have sex with her husband. Yeah, like mutual human respect for a person. I don't know. Here are some arguments why a woman who loves her husband might want to rethink this axiom. Or how about, I don't know, crazy idea, the guy in the relationship, bearing in mind it's a cis heteronormative relationship, maybe tries to communicate with his wife, ask like what's going on. Maybe if they are both willing, they could try out a few different things. They could try couples therapy, or perhaps she is asexual, in which case, not her fault. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. And these are, you know, when you're pressured into marriage by a religious sense or an otherwise conservative upbringing, it can make you feel like you're not normal. But, asexuality is normal. But no, he's not gonna worry about that. First, women need to recognise how a man understands a wife's refusal to have sex with him. A husband knows that his wife loves him first and foremost by her willingness to give her body to him. This is rarely the case for women. Few women know their husband loves them because he gives her his body. The idea sounds almost funny. So, yeah, good old toxic masculinity there. Women act one way, men act another way. I'll tell you what, okay, just as a personal thing, this whole idea of sharing emotions with a man and so on, it being emasculating or otherwise embarrassing, it just doesn't belong in the modern world. I communicate with Bill, he communicates with me. I've had very uncommunicative relationships in the past, including myself. I've also been very uncommunicative in the past. I was brought up to bottle up a lot of my emotions, and sadness would come out as anger. And that's the way a lot of men are brought up, and it doesn't feel healthy. It feels like you're a time bomb waiting to go off. And so when you meet a person who's willing to talk about stuff, willing to cry, willing to share things with you, it's like an oasis in a desert. It's the way that things should be. It's where we should be heading towards, because that kind of giving, sharing, that's what makes a healthy relationship, not man being man. And it doesn't mean that men are not allowed to pursue manly pursuits like chopping wood or whatever it is they're supposed to do. They can do that fine. It's just that this idea of clamming up so that it comes out in unhealthy ways, that's not good. We don't need that in our society anymore. That's all we're trying to say. This is therefore usually a revelation to a woman. Many women think men's natures are similar to theirs, and this is so different from a woman's nature that few women know this about men unless told about it. Now, I'm going to dispel a couple of things that people think are true about feminist thought and the modern man and so on. We don't think that gender doesn't exist at all. We do accept generally, not everyone, but we do accept generally that there are some fundamental differences in gender. It just so happens that we also think that a lot of the way gender is perceived and enacted is a social construct. And it starts right from childhood. It starts from very, very young. Boys see girls as weaker, even though until puberty hits, they are exactly the same strength. So, this is a major reason many husbands clam up. A man whose wife frequently denies him sex will first be hurt, then sad, then angry, then quiet. And most men will never tell their wives why they have become quiet and distant. They are afraid to tell their wives. They are often made to feel ashamed of their male sexual nature, and they are humiliated, indeed emasculated, by the feeling that they are reduced to having to beg for sex. Well, here is a thought: don't beg for sex, because it's rapey and it's weird, and it's a very uncomfortable feeling, and nothing will make you want to do it with your partner less than having that person literally beg you for sex. And I've got to say that I feel like there should be some deeper things looked into here, instead of it just being a duty, like no matter what's going on in your relationship, this is supposed to be happening regularly, at least however many times the husband, I notice it's the husband who gets to choose how often this occurs. Without going like too weird and too much information, I generally feel that regularity is good, and that's normal for us. There is no normal, generally. There's no normal. However many times you want to do it, if you're both happy, once a month or every day, like totally up to you. And the thing that you need to get on the same page with, which is why I'm so against this not having sex before marriage, is to make sure that you have a similar appetite for these things. But to go even further than that, I've had relationships where there have been problems. We've been arguing a lot, we haven't been getting on, and numerous things going wrong. And guess what? I didn't want to sleep with them because who wants to sleep with a person who makes you feel bad, who makes you feel bad about yourself, who you perhaps are starting to wonder if you even see a future with them? It's not conducive to a healthy sex life. For me personally, I need that feeling of security. And that's probably very gender normative of me, but like that's just how it is. It's not always a female thing, but if my partner then started like actively begging me, or even laying down, we will do it at this point, schedules can be useful if you're both up for that, but that's not going to work for me. No, it's just not. So maybe instead of all this nonsense, actually try and look deeper into your relationship. Again, couples counselling. Again, actually sitting down and talking about your feelings. Why is it that maybe one of you doesn't want to do it? Is that even a problem for that person? Just this is a whole mess, Dennis. I'm sorry. When first told about this, about men, women generally react in one or more of 5 ways. You have to be kidding. That certainly isn't my way of knowing if he loves me. There have to be deeper ways than sex for me to show my husband that I love him. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty fair enough. If this is true, men really are animals. I'd say that particular sentence belies like maybe more of an issue of shame around sex that maybe that person wants to either work on separately, in therapy, or maybe they just don't like sex. I don't know. Not my man. He knows I love him by the kind and loving way I treat him. Well, wouldn't that be nice? You have it backwards. If he truly loved me, he wouldn't expect sex when I'm not in the mood. Yeah, I'm actually not seeing anything wrong with that sentence, because it's an invasive thing. Like, if you really don't want to do it, like sometimes you think, I don't know if I really feel like it. Oh, actually, yeah, I do feel like it. It's not always that you're like burning with passion immediately, but if you're actually feeling like, I don't want to do it, it's quite a hell of a thing to sort of allow a person to enter you and just go at it. Like, that's not advisable, I don't think. 5, I know this, and that's why I rarely say no to sex. And I kind of feel bad for you. Let's deal with each of these responses. 1, you have to be kidding. The most common female reaction to hearing about men's sexual nature is incredulity, often followed by denial. These are entirely understandable reactions given how profoundly different and how seemingly more primitive men's sexual nature is compared to women's. And I might give it that perhaps it's true that men do think about sex a lot more than women. In my personal experience, I think it's just that when you're dealing with cis men and women, it's just a different way of looking at it. Like, women are perhaps a lot less centered on the orgasm, and a man is like, maybe they do think about it more, but in my personal experience, being a cis female, yeah, I think about it a lot. I don't want to gross anyone out or like freak anyone out, but it's true. Like, we also think about it a lot, but there just has to be other things in place for things to be conducive to a decent sex life, you know? Incredulity is certainly the reaction most women have when first being told that a man knows he is loved when his wife gives him her body. The idea that the man she is married to, let alone a man whose intelligence she respects, will to any serious extent measure her love of him by such a carnal yardstick strikes many women as absurd and even objectionable. Because again, it's not a job. It's not a job you should be expected to do. If you've decided to separate your roles out into he goes to work and she tidies the house or looks after the kids and whatever, that's her job. That's what she's chosen to do. The amount that you have sex is a separate thing. That is not her job. That's not anyone's job. But the question that should matter to a woman who loves her man is not whether this proposition speaks poorly or well of male nature. It is whether it is true. And it is true beyond anything she can imagine. A woman who often deprives her husband of her body is guaranteed to injure him and to injure the marriage, no matter what her female friends say, no matter what a sympathetic therapist says, and no matter what her man says. So basically, shut up everyone else, I'm Dennis Prager, I know all the things, she's supposed to do it, if she doesn't do it, that's the reason the marriage isn't working. Okay. Very few men will confess to the amount of hurt and eventual anger they experience when repeatedly denied sex. Okay, I'm just going to pause here. What about the hurt and eventual anger of feeling like you have to do it to the point where it really crosses a line and you're essentially used as some sort of vessel for the guy that you have been brought up to or convinced by him that that is your job, that is what you're good for. No word of that, never mind, don't worry about it. He's not concerned about that. Of course, there are times when a man must simply refrain from initiating sex out of concern for his wife's physical or emotional condition. And then there are men for whom sex really has anything to do with making love or whose frequency of demands are excessive. What excessive means ought to be determined by the couple before the refusals begin or continue. But the fact remains, your man knows you love him by your willingness to give him your body. So never mind him seeing her as a person or what she does in the house, assuming this is the kind of relationship he means, in that she takes care of the children, blah blah. If she's not giving him regular sex, she's not doing her job properly. And I mean, it's nice that he actually points out that there are points in which his wife's physical or emotional condition may mean refraining. But without meaning to put words in his mouth, I'm guessing those are probably times when, I don't know, she's just got back from the hospital, or she's actually physically crying because perhaps of a bereavement or something. Personally, I have chronic pain. People who have chronic pain have to take what they can get because there are points where it's impossible. And I'm guessing that that's probably not going to be good enough for Dennis. If this is true, men really are animals. Correct. Compared to most women's sexual nature, men's sexual nature is far closer to that of animals. So what? That is the way he is made. Blame God and nature. Telling your husband to control it is a fine idea. But he already does. Every man who is sexually faithful to his wife already engages in daily heroic self-control. He has married knowing he will have to deny his sexual nature's desire for variety for the rest of his life. To ask that he also regularly deny himself sex with the one woman in the world with whom he's permitted sex is asking far too much. Deny him enough times and he may try to fill this need with another woman. If he is too moral to ever do that, he will match your sexual withdrawal with emotional and other forms of withdrawal. So, nice blackmail there. You can see perhaps why Dennis has had 2 divorces, because that whole paragraph there is just an absolute mess. He's engaging in daily heroic self-control by not sleeping with every stranger he crosses paths with. There's no mention of whether the stranger he crosses paths with is actually also up for it, or, you know, how blurry are these lines getting? Like, is he saying if he doesn't get it from his wife regularly, that he's just going to demand it of some other woman, like maybe a secretary at work or whatever? I mean, is this the 50s? This really sounds like the 1950s. So basically, deny him sex, he's just going to emotionally blackmail you. 3. Not my man. Many women will argue understandably. My husband knows I love him. He doesn't need me to have sex with him to know that. And this is especially so when I'm too tired or just don't want sex. Anyway, my man only enjoys sex with me when I'm into it too. And that's quite healthy. Like, who wants to do it with a person when they're kind of just lying there or whatever, looking like they just want you to end? That's, like, is that attractive to anyone? Is that a thing that people want, like, to know that they've just literally laid back and are thinking of something else? Like, okay, Dennis. The importance of mutual kindness to a marriage is impossible to overstate. But hang on, the importance of mutual kindness to a marriage is impossible to overstate. But while necessary, it is not sufficient. Women can understand this by applying the same rule to men. What does that even mean? Does that mean that he's going to be kind when you refuse a bit, but if you keep refusing, the kindness is going to end? I'm not going to go any further with that because perhaps I'm misreading it, or but while necessary, it is not sufficient. Women can understand this by applying the same rule to men. Most women will readily acknowledge that it is certainly not enough for a man to be kind to her. If it were, women would rarely reject kind men as husband material. But as much as a woman wants a kind man, she wants more than that. If a man is, let us say, lacking in ambition, or just doesn't want to work hard, few women will love him, no matter how kind he is. In fact, most women would happily give up some kindness for hard work and ambition. A kind man with little ambition is not masculine, therefore not desirable to most women. So again, like, it's taking a very rigid view of things. It's not counting house husbands. It's not counting the fact that some women have a higher powered job than her husband, even if he does work. It's also not, you know, taking into account that, like, why does it have to be one or the other as well? Like, I've had a relationship where I was working and he was refusing to work because he chose to smoke weed rather than get a job. Like, you can smoke weed and work, but he didn't want to do that. And so we were totally unsuited because the bills still needed to be paid, but we had not discussed beforehand what our roles were going to be, and I had assumed that we would both be in the same boat and work and pay towards bills. If he had entered a relationship where that was fine with his other half, then that would be a different matter. But it's so rigid, that what Dennis is saying is so rigid that it's not taking into account the multitude of different varieties of relationship out there. It's just saying that the guy does this and that is masculine, the woman does this and that is feminine. As he says, likewise, a kind woman who is not sexual with her husband is not feminine. She is a kind roommate, and that is incredibly disturbing. Furthermore, a woman who denies the man she loves sex is not kind. I do not need to say anything else there. 4. You have it backward. Every rational and decent man knows there are times when he should not initiate sex. Oh yeah, like she's actively crying, probably that's the time that Dennis means. In a marriage of good communication, a man would either know when those times are, or his wife would tell him, and she needs to. Women should not expect men to read their minds. He is her man, not her mother. Okay, so bearing in mind, I actually agree that no, men are not mind readers. I do think that there are some women who expect their other half, like cis women who expect their other half to read their minds and then get angry when they don't. And I think you've got to tell the other person how you're feeling, and then if they still aren't, great, then that is their problem. However, he is her man, not her mother, implies like such a sexist, thing, that he's just gonna like ride roughshod over her emotions unless she like actively states out like, maybe can we not do it tonight because my brother was in a car accident and I'm upset. Like, mother is in Dennis's world an insult. So if you're gonna like say to your female partner, are you okay? You don't seem your normal self. Is there anything that you want to talk to me about? Like, to him, that's being a mother. That's an insult. You've got to say, please could you not do it to me whilst I'm trying to sit here watching telly. So yeah. But to repeat the key point, rejection of sex should happen infrequently, and it should almost never be dependent on mood. See part 2 next week, and we will have a look over that, don't you worry. 5, I know this, and that's why I rarely say no to my husband. This is a wise woman. She knows a sexually fulfilled husband is a happy husband. At the same time, men need to recognise that complete sexual fulfilment is unattainable in this world. He's got such a view of like this mad, like ravenous man, and they are not all like that. Like, yeah, some guys' appetite is very high. Some women's appetite is very high. Some non-binary people's appetite is very high, and everything in between. Like, it's so rigid. And because a happy husband loves his wife more, this cycle of love produces a happy home. In part 2, I will explain in detail why mood should play little or no role in a woman's determining whether she has sex with her husband. So I'm going to make a prediction here, and it is that women are overly emotional beings, whereas men are logical, and logic dictates that a relationship must have regular sex, whereas a woman is just completely at the mercy of her whims, and her flighty self could just decide to withdraw sex at an inopportune moment. I could be wrong, but I'm going to guess that's where he's going to go. I conclude part 1 with this clarification. Everything written here applies under 2 conditions. The woman is married to a good man. I mean, that's quantitative. How do you qualify whether a man is good? 2, she wants him to be a happy husband. If either condition is not present, nothing written here matters. But if you are a woman who loves your husband, what is written here can be the most important thing you'll read concerning your marriage, because chances are the man you love won't tell you. Okay, so like basically this is Dennis's bitching about what annoyed him about his previous wives, in that they had autonomy over their own bodies, and they were like, Dennis, please stop hassling me. Okay, in part 1 I made the argument that any woman who is married, oh please go away, to a good man and who wants a happy marriage ought to consent to at least some form of sexual relations as much as possible. Please bear in mind, this is not true. You don't have to do that. Men need to understand that intercourse should not necessarily be the goal of every sexual encounter. That's actually true. If both of you are into a sexual experience, but neither of you are, or one of you doesn't want it to go any further, that's fine. I'll give him that. In part 2, I advanced the argument that a wife should do so even when she is not in the mood for sexual relations. I am talking about mood, not about times of emotional distress or illness. So literally, like we said before, that is actually his, where he draws the line. You have to actually have had a bad thing happen, or be in bed with the flu or something like that, in order for it to be okay to deny your husband sex. Why? Here are 8 reasons for a woman to not allow being in the mood for sex to determine whether she denies her husband sex. So Dennis is going to lay out why why his wife has to lay out sex, and why we should all have to lay out sex, for our cis-normative partner. If most women wait until they are in the mood before making love with their husband, many women will be waiting a month or more until they next have sex. Okay, there's a lot of assumptions there. When most women are young, and for some older women, spontaneously getting in the mood to have sex with the man they love can easily occur. But for most women, for myriad reasons, female nature, childhood trauma, not feeling sexy, being preoccupied with some problem, fatigue after a day with the children and or other work, just not being interested, there is little comparable to a man's out of nowhere and seemingly constant desire for sex. So he's actually written childhood trauma, and that's very interesting and very telling. So Dennis is actually pointing out that his wife, or some other lady, may have childhood trauma. We don't need to go into what, because I think we kind of all know. And yet that's not going to be an excuse. It's not enough. It's lumped in there with not feeling sexy in general. Never mind the fact that if he demands sex off of a survivor, it's just gonna take them right back to this whatever trauma happened. Like, that bit actually has me a bit speechless. I'm not surprised, I'm just saddened. Why would a loving, wise woman allow mood to determine whether or not she will give her husband one of the most important expressions of love she can show him? What else in life of such significance do we allow to be governed by mood? Because I don't know, it doesn't involve an invasive event which means that you are then seen as an object by your significant other. It then takes away any humanity that your other half perceives that you have, and you're just purely a vessel. I mean, like, just off the top of my head, those are some reasons. What if your husband woke up one day and announced that he was not in the mood to go to work? If this happened a few times a year, any wife would have sympathy for her hard-working husband. But what if this happened as often as many wives announce that they are not in the mood to have sex? Most women would gradually stop respecting and therefore eventually stop loving such a man. Yet again, we'll go back to the relationship that I had in which he refused to work and I was working. This was not a situation that he and I had worked out beforehand. This is the situation that he took for granted. And it's a situation that we sat down and spoke about, and either could have worked around in that he then did decide to get a job, or we broke up and found partners that were more compatible. If you're in a relationship in which your sex drive is not compatible, it's perfectly reasonable, without making each other feel like crap, to decide that maybe it's not working, or you'll find some other way to deal with it. But no, sex is not a job. It's not a job. It's not a thing that you have to do to keep your relationship ticking over. It can, it can help a relationship in many ways, but only if both of you are on the same page. If you're both wanting to do it just as much as the other, it can be great. But if it's one of you not wanting to do it, it can be a hell for that person. So, what woman would love a man who was so governed by feelings and moods that he allowed them to determine whether he would do something as important as go to work? Why do we assume that it is terribly irresponsible for a man to refuse to go to work because he's not in the mood, but a woman can, indeed ought to, refuse sex because she is not in the mood? Why? Because it's dehumanising. Refusing to go to work can cause a lot of problems, sure, financial being one of them, but with regards to not wanting to have sex but feeling like you've got to, it's dehumanising. This brings us to the next reasons. The baby boom generation elevated feelings to a higher status than codes of behaviour. I think all of those 1950s infomercials beg to differ, telling you how you should behave. In determining how one ought to act, feelings, not some code higher than one's feelings, became decisive. No shoulds, no oughts. In the case of sex, therefore, the only right time for a wife to have sex with her husband is when she feels like having it. She never should have it. But marriage and life are filled with shoulds. 4. Thus, in the past generation, we have witnessed the demise of the concept of obligation in personal relations. We have nurtured in a culture of rights, not a culture of obligations. To many women, especially among the best educated, the notion that a woman owes her husband sex seems absurd, if not actually immoral. They have been taught that such a sense of obligation renders her property, exactly what I was saying. Of course, the very fact that she can always say no and that this no must be honoured renders the property argument absurd. A woman is not property when she feels she owes her husband conjugal relations. She's simply wise enough to recognise that marriage is based on mutual obligations as opposed to rights alone, and certainly as opposed to moods, are likely to be the best marriages. So continually the wants of the female are kind of relegated to female flights of fancy. It's not a thing to be taken seriously. And the fact that it's not physically impossible for her to say no doesn't account for the fact that she will feel enormous pressure not to say no. And that then creates a very grey area of consent. And if she is told again and again that it is her duty that she's got to put out, basically, she's not going to want to say no, but she will not be up for it. Partially in response to the historical denigration of women's worth since the 1960s, there has been an idealisation of women and their feelings. So if a husband is in the mood for sex and the wife is not, her feelings are deemed of greater significance because women's feelings are of more importance than men's. One proof is that even if the roles are reversed, she is in the mood for sex and he is not. Our sympathies again go to the woman and her feelings. So, I don't know who these straw people are that he's talking about, but if generally one half of, or however many of you are in a relationship, are feeling like you're not getting out of it what you're putting in, you're not getting the sex that you want, then it's a thing that you should discuss like adults, or it's a thing that perhaps you're just not suited to each other, or lots and lots of different things. It's not a thing that the other half, or however many, should feel responsible for and should carry your sex drive on their shoulders, so to speak. So no, generally I'm not seeing that society's sympathy is with the woman either way, Yet another outgrowth of 60s thinking is the notion that it is hypocritical or wrong in some other way to act contrary to one's feelings. One should always act, post-60s theory teaches, consistent with one's feelings. Therefore, many women believe that it would simply be wrong to have sex with their husband when they are not in the mood to. Of course, most women never regard it as hypocritical and rightly regard it as admirable when they meet their child's or parents' or friends' needs when they are not in the mood to do so. They do what is right in those cases rather than what their mood dictates. Why not apply this attitude to sex with one's husband? Given how important it is to most husbands, isn't the payoff a happier, more communicative and loving husband and happier home worth it? So, helping your friend move a sofa isn't the same as your friend messaging you going, "Oh, I've got such blue balls, what am I going to do?" And then going around there to, service him. Unless that's what you want to do. If it's not what you want to do, you don't have to do that. It's a completely different thing. And instead of using sex as a tool to make the husband more communicative, why doesn't he try being more communicative? If that's the thing it takes for him to open up about feelings or something like that, why doesn't he just try doing that instead of laying on some guilt trip? Many contemporary women have an almost exclusively romantic notion of sex. It should always be mutually desired and equally satisfying, or one should not engage in it. Therefore, if a couple engages in sexual relations when he wants it and she does not, the act is dehumanising and mechanical. There is also another word for it. Now, ideally, every time a husband and wife have sex, they would equally desire it and equally enjoy it. But given the different sexual natures of men and women, this cannot always be the case. If it is romance a woman seeks, and she has every reason to seek it, it would help her to realise how much more romantic her husband and her marriage are likely to be if he is not regularly denied sex, even of the non-romantic variety. This is so, like, what gets... Okay, sorry, oversharing again. But I and many others, I feel, what gets us in the mood is not necessarily this thing of bringing flowers, or it's lovely when Bill brings me flowers, but it's not seen as like an exchange, like I've brought you flowers, therefore come on, you know. It's a separate thing. It's like romance doesn't mean you have to give me sex. Romance is wonderful, and Bill and I are very romantic, but they don't go hand in hand. They're not a thing that goes hand in hand in my mind or his. So to think that women have to have romance immediately before it just isn't true. And I think this is just his way of saying, look, I can't always be asked with foreplay, so sometimes you're just going to have to suck it up, which is kind of sad. And like, okay, so sometimes lengthy foreplay is, you know, neither of you are in the mood for it, but that's a mutual thing. He's got a very, like, Mills and Boon idea of a woman here, and it doesn't account for the fact that the cis women in his life are individuals and have their own things that will get them going, and it isn't always romance. Sometimes it might be him, I don't know, pretending to be a forest nymph or something weird like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel that he's kind of unimaginative and basically just expects her to accept that and just go along with it. 8. In the rest of life, not just in marital sex, it is almost always a poor idea to allow feelings or mood to determine one's behaviour. Far wiser is to use behaviour to shape one's feelings. Act happy no matter what your mood, and you will feel happier. Act loving and you will feel more loving. Act religious no matter how deep your religious doubts, and you will feel more religious. Act generous even if you have a selfish nature, and you will end with a more generous nature. With regard to virtually anything in life that is good for us, if we wait until we're in the mood to do it, we will wait too long. So basically what he's advocating here is to live a lie. I get faking it till you make it, I guess. I mean, I get acting generous, like helping out people when maybe you really don't feel able to, because you don't want to be rude, or, you know, if someone pops round that, you know, like a surprise visit or something, rather than going, no, I'm not in the mood, and slamming the door, you might make them a cup of tea and have a bit of a chat before you say, I've got stuff to do. But that's a kind of different thing to what he is saying, which is basically, woman, give it up. It's an act of kindness, and you wouldn't want to be an ungodly woman now, would you? The best solution to the problem of a wife not being in the mood is so simple that many women, after thinking about it, react with profound regret that they had not thought of it earlier in their marriage. That's because they've been indoctrinated, and they've probably been harangued by their partner or by you. As one bright and attractive woman in her 50s ruefully said to me, had I known this while I was married, he would never have divorced me. Good, so you found the one emotionally unhappy woman that agreed with you. So you found a token. Well done. That solution is for a wife who loves her husband. If she doesn't love him, mood is not the problem. To be guided by her mind, not her mood, in deciding whether to deny her husband sex. If her husband is a decent man, if he is not, nothing written here applies. A woman will be rewarded many times over outside the bedroom, and if her man is smart, inside the bedroom as well, with a happy, open, grateful, loving and faithful husband. That is a prospect that should get any rational woman into the mood more often. And if that was the way that we all took relationships, I feel that we would be living an apocalyptic nightmare. Basically anything that Dennis pretty much has laid out here, don't do. Communicate with each other as humans. Don't withdraw your affection because someone else is withdrawing something in the bedroom. Try communicating just don't do this. Don't ever follow Dennis's advice. It's always really bad advice. Okay, thanks.